collaborative initiative Enhance IIT Kharagpur and LGBRIMH, bringing together expertise from mental health, technology, and research to advance responsible and inclusive AI in healthcare. We have a diverse group of participants and experts today, including mental health professionals, computer science experts, and lived experience experts. Your perspectives are all valuable and we encourage active engagement throughout the day. Today, our theme is representation, fairness, and safety in AI. Over the next few hours, we have 4 sessions online and 1 session offline, including seminars, workshops, and a panel discussion, with our final co design session, which will be conducted offline. Each session is designed to build on the previous, culminating in a hands on exploration of AI applications and implications in real world settings. We have a few housekeeping rules for our online participants. We encourage all our participants to join the Q&A chat if they have questions, and we will try our best to answer all of them during the Q&A sections. We request everyone to be respectful on the forum and get involved in the discussion. Our first session is a seminar on evaluating multilingual and multicultural AI models for accuracy and bias. We are honored to have Dr. Sunaina Sitaram. Her session will run for 55 minutes, followed by Q&A. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Prabha Chandra, who is the chair for this session. Ma'am is a senior researcher with extensive experience in women's mental health and has pioneered the first ever mother-baby inpatient psychiatric unit. She is the current president of the International Association of Women's Mental Health and the editor-in-chief of Archives of Women's Mental Health. We are fortunate to have ma'am here, who will guide us through the seminar and set the stage for discussion.
Thank you so much, Aishwarya. It's such a pleasure to introduce Sunaina Sitaram to this audience. I've been, ever since Lekhansh told me that you're going to be speaking, I've been following all your, research and all your work. And I'm so impressed by what you're doing. But as a formal introduction, Dr. Sunaina Sitaram is a principal researcher at the Microsoft Research India in Bangalore. She completed her PhD at the Carnegie Mellon University in 2015. And most importantly, I think this whole initiative of improving performance of LLMs in languages other than English, particularly, keeping in mind the cultural nuance of languages, which is such a huge challenge in India, especially. And we've been discussing that for the last couple of days. And she's basically been working on improving models. She's been the director of the MSR India Research Fellow Program. Hopefully, hear more about it in the days to come. And like I said, she regularly publishes research, and if you go and look her up on Google Scholar, you'll find a range of articles on this topic. And I've become so intrigued in this whole area. Being a polyglot myself, and somebody who's been working in, working with people with mental health problems for so many years, recognizing the nuance of language and the importance of not just sort of basic language, but dialects, mixtures of languages, and how do you then translate that into a mental health paradigm, which is very often sort of, both verbal, non-verbal, is something that is a challenge that we all face. Sometimes I think our brain has evolved so beautifully. If you think of, if as a clinician, if a Bengali talks or a Malayali talks or a Tamilian talks, even just by the nuance of the language, you kind of can make out where this person is going. The kind of words they use, the kind of pauses they have. So I think it's going to be interesting and challenging, but we are waiting to listen to you. And like Aishwarya mentioned, we are very keen to have some questions at the end. So those of you who have questions, please keep putting them on chat, and we'll, compile them at the end. So over to you, Sunaina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prabha, for the kind introduction, and also to Dr. Lekhansh for the invitation to this. I think this is a wonderful gathering. I see a lot of the names on the schedule are very familiar. Professor Animesh and Professor Monojit from MBZ. So it's wonderful to see everyone come together and participate in this very important discussion. I think it's very timely and necessary that we pay attention to, this problem of trying to make these systems more culturally aware. And also, given all the momentum building around AI in India, I think that also makes it very timely. So today I'm going to talk about one of the issues that I feel is the most urgent and understudied or underappreciated in AI. And hopefully this will provide some sort of context on why AI models that look very good on paper don't always translate very well into the real world, right? And I'll try to give you one of the reasons why this could be, and then of course some potential ways that we could solve this challenge. But this is also like a caution to anybody who is using these AI models in real world applications, like what they need to keep in mind when they're doing that, right? So today I'll talk about evaluation, which is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I have been working on this for the last 5 or 6 years now, pre-LLM, even in the older sort of, models which were much simpler and much easier to interpret. And I think that evaluation really gives us probably the only way to figure out what's going on inside these very complex black box models. This is, of course, work that we've been doing with our group at MSR India, but also lots of collaborators outside as well. Okay, so let me get started. So just to get everyone on the same page, right, I want to just talk a little bit about what today's AI really looks like, just so that we know what we are referring to over here. So there's, of course, the large language models, or Gen AI as we popularly, refer to them. And today these models are really multimodal, so they can handle text, image, audio, video, etc. in the same model typically. Although, text is really the dominant paradigm that people use it in, but they can also handle other forms of other modalities as well. And the real magic with these models that happened when ChatGPT was introduced was that these seem to perform almost any task, right? You specify something in natural language and it seems like it can do it for you, right? And so that makes them super flexible, and that is why they're integrated into all sorts of different applications. The other really popular, framing these days of AI is in the AI agent paradigm, where these are essentially these Gen AI kind of models, but the addition is that these models can also do other things like planning, reasoning, with a double quote there. And more importantly, they can actually act. So they can take decisions on your behalf, or take not decisions, but do things on your behalf. And they do this by actually using tools like say code, executing code, or using other kinds of tools, and they do things which can handle quite complex workflows as well. So there's nothing very magical about AI agents. Like, it's essentially just hooking up the Gen AI system itself to some sort of tool that can then go and execute something on your behalf, right? But then here already you can see that they're giving a lot of power to these systems, right? They're able to do things. For example, they may do a banking transaction on your behalf, or they may go and buy something on your behalf, and so on, right? And so it's critical that the thing that happens before it, so the Gen AI system, right, that is behaving as it should. And then there are, of course, other language technologies as well, which we do use on a daily basis. So there are specific models that are created for doing specific things. So these could be speech models that recognize speech, or translation models, or other models like that. And of course, there are lots of classifiers that are still used that are specifically trained for taking particular decisions, right? And so these typically use some sort of pattern matching. They could use very specific features, or they could be more general, and then they aid in some sort of decision making. So this is sort of course, there's AI that goes beyond this also, but this is generally the most popular kind of AI models that we deal with today. And today I'm going to talk about LLM evaluation specifically, but then a lot of the things that I'm saying will apply to some of these other technologies as well. So just keep that in mind, that we are focusing on LLMs here, but some of these things generalize as well. So as we all know, right, especially after ChatGPT came out, now it's been, 3 years since it came out, right? LLMs have really seemed to rise very, very impressively, right? And this is because they have demonstrated a lot of progress on standardized benchmarks that people have decided, like these are the benchmarks that we are going to care about. And, these LLMs seem to be getting better and better and better at them. And From this, people have understood that there are all sorts of sophisticated capabilities, including things like reasoning, that these models are able to now do. Right. So there are a couple of benchmarks here. You don't need to look at the details, but I'm just showing you, for example, on the left, there is the MMLU benchmark, which is extremely popular. Any new model that gets released, if you see the tech report, you'll always find the score on MMLU. And what started with like very poor scores of accuracy kind of scores around in the 20s have now gone to the 80s or even beyond. Actually, the latest models are, I think, the late 80s, right? And so it seems like models are able to solve this very well, right? And this is supposed to be a hard task. There's another grand challenge kind of a task called ARC-AGI, which is essentially trying to measure two things: how accurate the system is, but also how efficient it is, so how small the model is as well. And it seems like smaller and smaller models are now able to get more and more accurate, right? And so if you look at any of these standard benchmarks, it seems like we're just making progress very, very quickly, right? The new models are coming every day, and then they are able to beat earlier scores, etc. However, the problem is that time and time again, these evaluation results have been called into question because of various reasons, right? There are problems with the way that we evaluate, so the techniques that are used for evaluation. There are problems with the data sets themselves that are being used for doing this evaluation. And then finally, the interpretation of what that evaluation says, right? Whether we can really say that just because it does well on a particular benchmark, the model is now able to do reasoning, right? That is also, it's been called to question time and again. However, it is still the same paradigm that is used, right? It is still the same benchmarks that are used. Any new model that comes will still report scores on the same benchmark. And this is a thing that I think urgently needs to be relooked at in order for us to make real progress. And further, when we look at more complex landscapes, like the kind we have in India, where we have a complex cultural and linguistic landscape, etc., we really need to rethink whether this narrative really holds or not. So why is evaluation really important? Of course, we know that it's important for us to figure out whether a model is able to do something or not. But evaluation is actually used in multiple stages in the model development pipeline itself. So whenever we train models, right, we typically evaluate them on some benchmark to try and figure out whether the models are getting better or not. So a lot of times evaluation benchmarks are actually used to optimize the model itself, to pick whether, a particular set of model weights is better than the other. And actually, this is not the right thing to do. You're not supposed to use the test set when you're doing training, right? Even to optimize models, but that is typically done. Evaluation, of course, is one of the only ways we can ensure that models are aligned with whatever policies we have. For example, for safety or responsible AI, we need to check whether these models are actually aligned with these policies. Evaluation is used to enable new capabilities in models. So typically people start by creating a hard benchmark in the capability that they want, and then they go and try to train their model in order to get that capability. Very importantly, and I think this is really crucial for any anybody who's building an application, is that the way to pick which model to use for your particular application is typically by looking at some sort of benchmark scores, right? You need to figure out, and there are a whole bunch of models to choose from now. And so typically you look at the scores for any domain that you're particularly interested in and then pick that, right? Or at least pick a subset of models that then you would try on your own use case. It's used, of course, to measure field-wide progress and also for scientific inquiry and rigor, of course. Right. So evaluation is not just testing, right? It's not just taking the model and doing some small testing. It's actually used for all of these different reasons, and that is why it plays such a critical role in the AI development and also usage lifecycle today. Why is LLM evaluation so difficult, right? Especially compared to the previous kind of AI models that we've had. What are the challenges that we face, right? Inherently, LLM outputs are non-deterministic. So if you ask the LLM the same question 5 times, it's likely that you will get 5 different answers, right? And so this makes it really difficult to figure out whether when you do use these LLMs in the real world, whether they're going to behave in the way that you want them to or not, right? The second thing is that LLM outputs are highly dependent on prompt wording. So you change the wording slightly, and the output can be completely different. And even beyond wording, like if you just add a comma sometimes, right, the output changes, right? And so this is very scary for anybody who's using these in a real world deployment, because again, it's lack of control that you have on what the output is going to be. There's also a lack of ground truth many times. So many of these open-ended problems do not have a single correct answer, right? So that makes it really hard to evaluate, because what is the right answer? And it could be subjective or it could be very nuanced, and automatically doing that kind of evaluation becomes very difficult. There aren't very good metrics for evaluating the Gen AI systems of today that use complex language. So as opposed to things like classifiers, where you do have simple metrics because you're basically trying to classify into certain categories, right? Here you have these rich outputs, and they can have all sorts of other richness as well, like formatting and things like that, right? Which make it really hard to try and compare them, even if you have a single ground truth, right? Trying and doing that kind of comparison. And all of the traditional methods that have been used for doing this kind of comparison are word overlap based. So they basically take the reference that you have and they take whatever the LLM produced, and then they try to look at what the overlap was between the words. And that clearly fails when you have these systems that are capable of producing very sophisticated language. There have been attempts to create better metrics, but unfortunately, none of the metrics really work very well today. It's also, as I mentioned, hard to measure complex chains of reasoning, for example, etc., using these automated metrics. Again, because even if you have a ground truth, it's very difficult to compare them, but especially in the case where it's not just one output, but it could be a chain of different outputs. And finally, the models themselves are getting better and better very quickly. And so you build a benchmark, which is really good. You have a good metric for it. You have appropriate ground truth, etc. But it's very likely that that benchmark is going to become stale. And so all the effort that is created in building these benchmarks, right, doesn't really last all that long. And so there isn't a lot of incentive to go and build very good benchmarks because of this, because they do become stale very soon, right? And finally, models are one thing and systems are the other, right? So systems are complex combinations of models. There could be guardrails, there could be smaller models like classifiers, etc., in front of them. There could be, if they're agentic systems, there could be tools, etc., right? And so evaluating these systems is obviously much more complex than evaluating just a model output, right? Because you're trying to then figure out if there's an error, where the error happened, and so on. And also trying to build benchmarks for evaluating these kinds of more complex systems is itself a very hard task, right? So because of all of this, LLM evaluation is now one of the most challenging aspects of AI development. And very recently, people have been paying attention to this problem as compared to, I think, last year or even the year before. This year, I see a lot more papers. So for example, I was at one of the premier AI venues called ICLR earlier this year. And I would say around 30 to 40% of the papers were on evaluation, because people are recognizing that unless you do this right, all the other things don't really lead to improvements. Okay, so what are the kinds of techniques that are currently used for doing LLM evaluation? And this is actually a very nice 2D map that was there in one of the papers last year. And it basically set two axes. So the x-axis is basically looking at how much human requirement is there in order to do that evaluation. So, and of course, that usually corresponds to cost as well. And then the y-axis is looking at how realistic that evaluation is to what would happen in a real world setting with actual users, right? So if you look at the thing on the extreme bottom left, which is very cheap, like not expensive at all, doesn't really require too many humans, but also is not very realistic. That's the benchmarking that we do today, right? Those are the kinds of standard benchmarks that we create. And the thing is that you create the benchmark once, you can keep on using it for different models. So it's not super expensive to do. And on the extreme upper right, you see an actual field study where you're taking the application, you're going to real people who have stake in that application or actual users, and then doing a study on that, right? So obviously that requires a lot of humans, but it's also super realistic to the context, or it is the actual context that we are trying to study this in, right? And then there are things in between these two extremes, right? So one of them is where you simulate users who are actually using a particular application, where you may have controlled studies, you may have better benchmarking where you're not just taking one benchmark, but you're taking multidimensional benchmarks and trying to find different aspects of something, etc. Right? So there are all these things in between as well. So today I'm going to talk about the two major sort of evaluation techniques that are used today in LLMs. One is the benchmarking that we've already talked about a lot, and the second is simulated evaluation, or what is more popularly referred to as judge paradigm. I'll go into why and how that particular paradigm is used. But you can see that there is a choice that we can make depending on what the what the requirement is, on how realistic it needs to be, and how much we are willing to pay or involve humans on how actually we want to do this evaluation. So benchmarking, I think everybody is quite familiar with. So the goal of benchmarking is to basically test multiple models on the same standard set of questions or challenge tasks. Because this is the same set of challenge questions that we have, it's replicable over time. So the same model you can keep evaluating again and again, and you will hopefully get similar, the same responses. You can also replicate across different models. So if you want to compare models, this is a very good way to do it. And the way that this is usually set up is you have some sort of data point and you have a ground truth that is associated with that, with some sort of metric that is defined for this particular task. And a lot of the popular benchmarks are like MMLU, GSM-8K, AIME, AGI eval, etc. There are a whole lot. So you open any tech report of any model that is released, and you will find an evaluation section with numbers for all these popular benchmarks, right? Now, the challenges with these benchmarks are, as I've already mentioned, there's usually a single ground truth which is available for these challenge questions, which may not be appropriate for everything. The metrics are imperfect. Sometimes they may be using these word overlap-based metrics, which are not great. Benchmarks saturate quickly, as I've already mentioned. Contamination is something that I will talk about in more detail, but this is basically when the test data is available as training data. Either it has been inadvertently leaked into the training, or it is used on purpose by the model builder in order to benchmark, right? And that is also something which we refer to as benchmark hacking, where the goal is really to do better on the benchmark so that we can then release a report which shows that the model is doing better on that particular benchmark rather than actually doing better on that task or domain itself, right? And because, as you've seen in the previous slide, there's a lot riding on evaluation, right? Like a lot. And so there are a lot of things that are done, which are not really scientifically rigorous in this whole process in order to make the model look better than it actually is, right? Because of these kinds of reasons. Here's LLMs as judges. So LLM as judges has become a very, very popular paradigm because of the fact that, as I mentioned, the ground truth may not be appropriate. You may not have the appropriate metrics, etc. So what LLMs as judges is basically using an LLM itself to evaluate outputs from other models or the model itself, which is actually not a good idea. But basically, this is because these LLMs are now capable of doing anything, right? You tell them to do something and they will do it. Why not ask them to do the evaluation also, right? So LLM acts as a judge and does the evaluation for you. And the reason that it is used is because of its flexibility. So now you can specify any rubric or metric in natural language. So for example, it could be accuracy, it could be helpfulness, it could be reasoning, it could be tone. All of these things you describe what this means, like what this particular metric means. And sometimes even without a reference to look at, right, in order to judge whether the output was, for example, accurate or not, LLM judges are used even as referenceless metrics. So for example, you're basically relying on the judgment of the LLM on its own without giving it any kind of reference and asking it to make this judgment about whether the output was accurate or not. And the hope here is that the LLM has seen a lot of data in the past, and so it has some notion of what say helpfulness is. And so it's going to lean on that and then do this judgment for you, even without having a reference, right? So this is really magical for work on benchmarks, right? Now you don't need to create a benchmark. Now you don't need to create any ground truth. You don't need, you just have to have a metric that you can specify in natural language, right? And the LLM is going to tell you a score for every single output, right? So it makes the whole evaluation process very, very easy. And this is very scalable, so it's just about making LLM calls. As long as you have access to an LLM, you can keep doing this. No need to involve any pesky humans in this, right? Like you can just keep asking the LLM. It's very low cost, right? Because low cost in the sense, of course, if you have access to these LLMs and you don't really count the cost of these API calls, right? And it can be somewhat replicable as well. You can, evaluate multiple models using the same LLM judge framing as well, right? Now, as you can imagine, I'm sure everybody knows this, right? That LLM judges are extremely imperfect because you're really relying on these LLMs, which themselves may not know a lot about a particular domain, say a particular language, and so on. But more than that, people have actually found a lot of other challenges also for LLM judges. So for example, they seem to exhibit self-bias. LLM judge prefers responses that are similar to its own style. So this is why it's a bad idea to ask the judge to evaluate its own output, because it's usually going to prefer its own output over the output of another one, even if that output is actually better, right? Because it has this self-bias. Also has other types of bias like position bias, length bias. So if you're trying to compare the responses of two different systems, right? You have an A and a B, and you don't randomize that, then very likely that it's always going to prefer A over B because it has some sort of, and we don't really know why this is, because there's no reason why it should actually prefer the thing that comes before. I'll show you an example of a prompt in the next slide. Length bias as well, there's some evidence that shows that these LLM judges also prefer things that are longer. And so one of the things that we do in our evals when we are comparing multiple models is ensure that the length of all the responses is approximately the same, right, to counter for this length bias. And of course, there's, if the judge doesn't know about a particular domain and you're really relying only on its own knowledge to do the evaluation and not giving it a reference, right, then it can misevaluate if it's not good. And very hard to determine why the model judges one response as better. Even if you ask, one of the things that people do a lot is, along with the score, they also say, give me a reason for why you gave this particular score, right? So this is similar to if you're working with humans, in addition to a score, you would ask them for some sort of reasoning about why they gave that score, right? But it's also been shown that a lot of times the reasoning has nothing to do with the output, and it's not necessary that it's actually used that particular reasoning while arriving at that output, right? So because of this, it's extremely messy, but this is also extremely popular, like because we have no other option, right? Because don't have right metrics, we don't have the right benchmarks and so on. This is used very, very, very often. So here's an example just to make it more concrete for people who are not aware of this LLM judge paradigm, right? You typically start by, saying you are an impartial evaluator and things like that. And then the question is actually the data point that you're trying to evaluate for. So this is a particular question, and then you have two responses, response A and response B, from two different models. And the task of the LLM judge is to determine which one is better based on different rubrics. You can specify these rubrics in much more detail. You can say exactly what you mean by, clarity, simplicity, accuracy, completeness, and so on. And then the judge will basically tell you like which is the response which is better, and then also why it thinks that it is better, right? And so if you look at this, it looks like, it's really great because it's giving you a score here. I mean, it's saying that B is better, so you can convert that into a score. It's giving you some sort of reasoning. The reasoning seems okay-ish and so on, right? So because of this, it's become so popular, this paradigm, because it makes the evaluation seamless. Now you can take any output and then just do this, and then you have your evaluation. No need for a benchmark or anything. But as I mentioned, there are all sorts of biases that go in. So most likely here, although in this particular case, it says that the B is the better response, very likely that if you do this over and over again, A would be the one that, wins. Even if A was not better, if response A was longer than response B, response A would probably win. And then you never know, whether it's actually doing the right thing or not. Right? So this is very much of a messy paradigm, but also, as I said, extremely popular. So now that I've given all this context, I'm going to switch over now to the multilingual and multicultural aspect of it, and why it's even harder to do these kinds of things in those contexts, right? So these English language benchmark results, even if they are impressive, they don't automatically translate into multilingual competence. So just because something does well in English does not mean that it's going to do well on other languages as well, right? And the reason is, of course, that there is all sorts of culture and context that adds extra complexities, but also that there is a very big data imbalance that is there in the data that is used for training these models. So the data that's used is predominantly in English, and there is a very long tail of languages. So we have around 7,000 languages in the world, right? Many of them are not written languages, so you would not find them at all in these data sets that are predominantly scraped from the web. But a lot of them are on the web. However, they are in minuscule quantities compared to English and some of the other, what are known as high resource languages, which are basic languages with data available in these data sets, right? So when we talk about high resource and low resource in the NLP setting, we are really referring only to the data availability and not to how many speakers are there in those languages and so on, because many of the low resource languages have millions of speakers, right? So because of this data imbalance, the training that is done inherently is very, very skewed towards English and a few more languages. And because of this, just because something does well on English, just because it's doing well on, an MMLU kind of thing, doesn't mean that it's going to have that same capability in other languages as well. And the reason that this really happens is because of the data imbalance problem, as I mentioned, of course, but also a lot of the benchmarks that are created are extremely English centric, right? So they are extremely Western centric. So for example, if you look at healthcare benchmarks, for example, they would be predominantly looking at, say, healthcare conditions in Western context, most likely in the US. They would be looking at, named entities and things like that that are popular there. For example, places and people in the US. So that kind of, even in the English benchmarks, they would be very Western centric, and they would not really check for, cultural knowledge of other places, right? There are a few multilingual benchmarks that have been created. So people do measure how well these models do on other languages. But the problem is that most of the multilingual benchmarks are simply translated versions of the English benchmarks, right? So you take a benchmark that was created for the Western context, you just run it through a translator, usually an automatic translator, and then you can get a benchmark for any other language that that translator supports, right? But now the problem is that all of those say the entities that were created for the Western context, right? Those don't translate into the other languages as their own entities, right? They will still be the original Western entities itself, or the health conditions, for example, will still remain those, right? They're not going to get translated into the health conditions that are Indian, right? For example. And especially when this is done automatically and without a human in the loop, what happens is that translation errors propagate, right? So translation is not perfect, especially as you go lower and lower resource. There will be errors in the benchmarks themselves. So if you look at these translated benchmarks, we've seen that 5 to 10% translation error itself is there in the benchmark, which means that if you measure a model on that, you don't know whether it's because of the error is because of the translation or because the model itself is doing poorly, right? So that again really destroys the whole evaluation process when we use these kinds of translated benchmarks. And people have tried to create these non-translated benchmarks or portions of benchmarks that are not translated. And very consistently, it is found that for those portions of non-translated benchmarks, the LLMs perform poorer compared to the translated portions of the benchmark, which means that, when we are looking at results only on translated benchmarks, we're getting a very overinflated score on what the LLM's capability is in that particular language, right? And so this really makes it very unclear about how these LLMs would perform in the wild in these other languages and contexts because of the lack of benchmarks. And as you've seen in the past, right, building benchmark, it requires a lot of care and it requires a lot of work, and benchmarks are likely to saturate easily, right? So building them for English is hard enough, but then going and building them for many different languages becomes even more difficult. And so there isn't that much motivation for people to keep building very high quality new multilingual benchmarks because of that. And again, translation just is a very easy shortcut, right? You just take something that somebody built for English, translate it, and then you have a benchmark for a particular language, but that doesn't really work very well. LLMs have also been shown to have a lot of biases when it comes to culture, as we've been talking about. So there has been multiple work that shows that there is systematic biases towards Western cultural norms, and the LLM sort of defaults to Western culture. Now, there is a question of, what the default should be. If you don't provide any context at all to an LLM, right, what should the default be? For example, if you ask a question like, what color should I wear to a wedding, right? And so in the Western world, the norm would be not to wear white to the wedding, right? Should that be the default answer with no other context given to the LLM? Or maybe if it's an Indian wedding, like the answer may be, that also depends on where you are in India, but maybe it's red, right? Shouldn't wear red to maybe a North Indian wedding because the bride may be wearing that color or something like that, right? So what should the default be? That is one question. The other question is, if you do provide context, is it able to adjust to that context or not? So if you are saying that I'm going to a Christian wedding in New York, right? Now tell me which color I should or should not wear to the wedding, right? Is it able to adjust its original default and have that kind of cultural adaptation or not? So there's been a study which was done based on what is called the World Value Survey, which is something that is, I'm sure you're all very familiar with that, where people are polled from different countries on different values, and then basically you plot them on this 2D thing to see where these different countries are, on average, of course, of the respondents, to see where they are in that particular thing. And here you're really looking at survival versus self-expression on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, traditional versus secular values. And then they ask the same questions to LLMs as well, to see where the LLMs fall in this whole picture. And unsurprisingly, the LLMs are closest to Sweden, Finland, Norway, etc., right? And not very close to, say, Latin America or Asia, Africa, etc. So the default, right, if you don't give any other context, the default seems to be that these are Western-centric, right? However, if you do give some context, right, they can, to a certain extent, adjust. So we have seen that these shift a little bit if you tell them, what kind of cultural context you are looking for. But that shift is very shallow, and it doesn't really, like, the more complex and culturally nuanced questions you ask, the harder it becomes for these models to really shift meaningfully. Another study that was done on some Arabic LLMs was basically trying to see how these models would complete sentences, whether they would complete them with more English or Western sort of completions, or whether they would actually do this in the sort of Arabic culturally appropriate ones. And these are Arabic LLMs, right? So they're responding in Arabic. Okay, so these are LLMs that are trained specifically on Arabic for the Arabic context and culture and so on. So this is not English training data, but Arabic training data, right? And even then, if you ask things like, after the prayer, I'm going with friends to drink, and then it suggests alcohol, for example, or when you're trying to ask about food, etc., it's suggesting steak and ravioli instead of something that is more culturally appropriate for the Arabic context, right? So this has been shown time and again, and this is something that is that's a very popular area of research now, trying to see how these models are culturally aligned or not. And so what are the different factors that contribute to this gap? I've already alluded to the data imbalance issue, right? So when you train these models, there is a big difference between the amount of data that's available for English versus the amount of data available for other languages, right? It's not just data though. A lot of the decisions that are taken in the modeling process, in the prompting, in the evaluation, etc., all of those also play a role in why there's a big gap between English and other languages. So we talked a lot about the general challenges with evaluation, right? I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about what makes multilingual evaluation even harder than just doing English evaluation, right? So the benchmarks and evaluation data sets that exist right now are very limited in terms of languages, dialects, cultures, mostly covering high resource, Western, rich industrial, like the weird kind of countries. And the ones that exist are also typically translated, right? So they are typically translated from English benchmarks. And so, for example, here you can see there's a nice example over here about a particular benchmark question that has been translated from English to, I think this is Arabic, right? And so it's asking a particular question about why Alexander the Great did something. But the answer is actually dependent on, which culture is answering the question, right? And so the Greeks may have a specific reason why they think Alexander did something, whereas the Persians may have another answer on why they did something. But none of that is captured in any of these translated benchmarks, right? The translated benchmark just takes whatever the original ground truth was as the ground truth and then treats it as that, right? And so even when you do translation, in addition to losing out on the accuracy and all due to translation errors and lack of cultural representativeness, there's also these more nuanced issues. And the thing is that these LLMs, right, when they're shown to be better at these benchmarks, the difference is hardly in a few points or even less than a point, right? So we can publish a paper saying that something is like 0.2% better than the previous model, right? But then we don't know whether that 0.2 has come because of things like this or because it's actually improved on that particular, on that particular domain. And then, so the LLM as multilingual judges part, the LLM as judges part I already mentioned, but we've done extensive work now in the last couple of years to see how well these LLMs do as multilingual judges themselves, right? Ask these questions for data points that are in other languages, right? How do these judges actually judge? And the way that we do this is basically we ask humans to do the same judgment, and then we compare what the agreement is between human judges and LLM judges and see whether that agreement is good or not, right? By using some correlation or something like that. So we see that lots of studies have shown, including our own work, that LLMs don't agree well with human evaluators. This could be for a variety of reasons, like humans also sometimes don't have great agreement on some of these tasks, right? So it could be just humans vary as well. But then even when we do, multiple human evaluators and all that, the interannotator between humans is definitely higher than interannotator between LLMs and human judges, right? So then it shows that these are worse in the multilingual setting than they are for English. In English also, they're not great. And so our recommendation really here is that if you're using LLMs as judges, especially in a multilingual, multicultural context, has to be done extremely carefully, right? Especially the lower resource language you go, it's going to probably not work very well. And it absolutely should not be used as the only evaluation metric. It can be used to scale up other kinds of evaluation, but it should not be used as the only thing when you're making a decision about, whether something goes or not, right? The other thing is the contamination problem. So this is a huge problem in evaluation. This is probably generally in evaluation, this is the largest, biggest problem today that people sort of sweep under the rug. But it's even in the of multilingual, because as I mentioned, multilingual benchmarks are so hard to come by, right? And so if we find that they're already subsumed into the training data, then we've sort of lost that benchmark, right? We created this benchmark that's really good with a lot of care and a lot of effort, and then it goes into the training data and the model is trained on that benchmark, so we cannot use it for evaluation anymore, right? So we did a study last year which showed that most of the benchmarks that were released prior to 2023 are already present in the training data of most LLMs, which means that they are essentially useless for evaluation, right? The other kind of contamination that can happen is that because a lot of these benchmarks are translated, even if the translated benchmark is not the contaminated model, the original benchmark may be, right? So suppose you took MMLU and you translated that into Kannada, right? So you have a Kannada MMLU now. And because you just translated it, it's like new data, so it's not in any model right now. But that original MMLU is already in the model, right? That is already contaminated. And all you have essentially done is this translation, and the model is very capable of doing the translation internally, right, on its own. So essentially, even though you have created it, because you have derived it from something that's already contaminated, this is also indirectly contaminated as well. And then a lot of data sets are based on something that is on the web, right? So we take things that are on the web, we transform them in some way, we annotate them in some way, etc., and then we create a benchmark. But because it is already on the web, the model has probably consumed it already in its training data. And so even though it may not know the answer to the question, it certainly knows the patterns in that language. And so that is also a kind of contamination. So if you see in this table below, basically this shows for a bunch of popular benchmarks, multilingual benchmarks, and a bunch of popular models, all the crosses are essentially that it has been contaminated already, and all the tick marks are that that particular data set is not present in the model. So we are in dire straits here, right? I mean, all of these benchmarks that we could have used for evaluating these models are now useless because they are already in the training data. So this really points to the fact that any new benchmark that is being created should not be available for these models to scrape and use and put into the training data, right? And as I have mentioned earlier, contamination is not just because it incidentally, it happens to be on the web. These models scrape it and then, they didn't even know about the fact that the model was, had this data set was in the model. And the data sets that are used typically for training these models are so large that you can't even go and search them for these kinds of presence of these data sets and so on, right? It's also possible that because benchmarking has become so critical, right, that if you put data out there and there is enough incentive for someone to do well on that benchmark, that they will train on that benchmark, or even if they don't train on the benchmark itself, they will train on a derived version of that benchmark, right? So they may create other data that looks very similar to what your benchmark looks like and then train on that so that they can do well on the benchmark. So just having that data available for, especially for model builders to see, is not a good idea when that benchmark is going to be used for a critical decision. When it comes to safety, there are a lot of studies that have shown that safety goes down once you go into multilingual languages, right? So toxicity increases when you go from, especially as you go to lower resource languages. So if you're prompting a model to do something, it is likely to produce toxic language in some of these low resource languages compared to English. This is because the guardrails that exist for English do not always exist for these other languages, plus the quality of the training data that is used, because there are a lot of sophisticated filters that are created for English, right? A lot of the sort of bad data gets filtered out before it goes into the training process, whereas those tools don't exist for these other languages. And so you're not able to sort of clean the data of those, although, I mean, we shouldn't be over cleaning the data also, but we're not able to do that well for the other languages. Seen a lot of things like stereotypes and biases, which are more predominant in non-English languages. Jailbreaking is a very big problem. So jailbreaking is basically getting the model to do something that it's not supposed to do, right? So for example, if you ask a model, like you go to ChatGPT and ask it how to create a bomb, it's probably going to refuse and not do that, right? But there are ways to ask it. So people have jailbroken these kinds of things by asking, say, adding some emojis or asking in crypto or some sort of cipher or something like that, right? And then the model itself can figure out the mapping and then understand what the intent is. But the easiest way to do jailbreaking is just asking the question in another language, because it doesn't have the guardrails for that other language, right? So it can't detect that it's not supposed to answer that question. And again, as you go lower and lower resource into this, the capabilities of detecting this sort of thing will just decrease, right? So a lot of the guardrails that we create are just not going to work very well for other languages. Data poisoning basically refers to when you're deliberately inserting bad data into the model in some way to make it again do something it's not supposed to do. And again, when you poison, suppose the model is very, very sort of has very strong guardrails in English, but then you poison some data in some other language, then you can get it to do things it's not supposed to do. So LLM safety basically is a very, very big concern, and we are making an effort to bring the community together on this aspect. Actually, this is a very understudied aspect right now of AI, like safety in multilingual contexts and what that means. Again, a lot of cultural considerations about bias and things like that also, which are very different from Western notions. All those also come into this. So the gap is very clear. There is a very substantial gap between non-English languages and cultures and English, right? And this becomes even worse when you go lower resource. And so, really has a risk of marginalizing a lot of people. And this is across all these dimensions. So we've seen it in accuracy, we've seen it in safety, cultural understanding, and robustness to these kinds of adversarial inputs like jailbreaking and so on. Right? So what can we do? So I'm going to spend the next, 5 to 10 minutes on talking about some of the, some recommendations, especially on evaluation, and then some of the work that we've been doing in the last year or so on this. Right? So if we are doing evaluation, we really recommend that we build benchmarks for each language and culture separately and not use web data or other benchmarks to build new benchmarks, right? And of course, benchmarks should be as representative of the real world task as possible. And if possible, involving target users in the benchmark creation process, if that's feasible at all. And to use LLM judges sparingly. And only after we are sure that, they agree with human evaluators. And I would say not use them as the only evaluation technique, right? Use them in combination with other techniques that are more trustworthy. And there's a very urgent need to improve the trust and rigor in this benchmarking process, both for English and also for non-English languages. You may all be aware that a whole host of new INDIC models are coming. They're being funded by the India AI mission, right? Like some 14 models are going to be coming very soon, and very critical that we evaluate them well using good evaluation techniques and rigor, and ensure that they will actually work for our languages and contexts. And really, if the evaluation results are going to be used for very important decision making, not to make benchmarks public, because we really want to prevent people from training on these benchmarks if that's going to be used for some critical decision making. So let me talk, I'll change gears now for the last 5-ish minutes and talk about a couple of projects that we've been doing, where our focus has really been on addressing all of the problems that I mentioned earlier. So the problem of coverage, so the lack of coverage of languages and cultures in these benchmarks, the problem of representativeness, so making sure that these benchmarks are not created from a Western-centric point of view, but really created from the Indian point of view or whatever the target community is. And also, the whole trust and rigor in the process. So making sure that we're not using data that's already contaminated, we're using new data and so on. So Pariksha is something that we did last year, which is on community evaluations. This is in collaboration with the organization called Karya, which was spun out of MSR India. Karya is an ethical data company, and basically their goal is to provide dignified digital work to enable pathways out of poverty for rural Indians. And so we did the largest multilingual human evaluation that has been done so far with them. So we did 90,000 human evals across 10 languages, and we evaluated 30 different models last year. And this was actually the first experience with the evaluation task for these Karya workers. So they had never done this kind of evaluation task, although they had done other digital annotation tasks like recording their speech and OCR, like transcribing speech and things like that. They had not really looked at GenAI output and tried to, sort of evaluate the output of GenAI, right? So this was the first time that they did it, and this also became a new business opportunity for Karya. So now they do evaluation as a service for many different companies. And so this was really the first large-scale LLM evaluation with this kind of a population, with the community itself, where the community gets a chance to tell us which model they prefer. So basically, the kind of evals that we did were we, again, ask a question to models, and then we get responses from 2 different models. And then we ask them to evaluate like which response is better based on some rubrics that we've told them, right? And so we did multiple kinds of evaluations, so 90,000 in all. So this was really like the largest scale effort. And Karya itself has become quite well known. They were on the cover of Time magazine earlier this year and so on. So, and yes, this is completely transparent. So after we did the evals, so we did not release the benchmark data before the evals, but after the evals, we released everything, including the scores from every single model and so on. So this is what the leaderboard looked like. So this is last year's. So it's a little dated. We don't need to look at the individual data points, but this is just to show that, we did these evals across 10 different languages and 30 different models. And there is a difference between the capabilities of these different models, right? So not all the models are doing equally well. The orange dot on the top so the left side is basically what the Karya evaluators said. And on the right side, we also did the same thing with LLM judges as well, right? And so you see that the orange dot is basically GPT-4o, which was the best model last year. And this also ends up being the best INDIC model for the INDIC languages as well. If you're interested in this, you can read the Pariksha paper that has all the details on, which models did, how they did on different dimensions and so on. But this is just to show that there is a variance in the performance of these models across, even across languages, but also in the models themselves, there is quite a lot of variance. So there is something to be said for picking the right model for your particular use case, right? Based on good evaluations. Another work that we did following up from that was called Health Pariksha. So in the Pariksha, original Pariksha, we basically came up with questions ourselves, So questions for each language and culture we came up with in-house where, okay, these are some culturally relevant questions for this particular language in certain domains. And then, but that was not really sort of real questions that users would ask these systems, right? So we wanted to go a little more in terms of realistic questions. So in Health Pariksha, we actually took real questions that users were asking a particular health bot. So this is a health chatbot that is deployed in Shankara Eye Hospital in Bangalore. And it already has a lot of users asking questions about cataract surgery. So what we did was we took these questions and we had ground truth for these questions. And because of that, we were able to then again we were able to essentially create a benchmark out of this and then do a evaluation across again some 25 different models. And because this is real data from real users, it has a lot of interesting things. For example, it has code switching where you add words, you mix multiple languages. So it asks about current operation here. It has cultural, context. So non-veg, for example, is a very Indian English term, right? So it talks about that. It has, spelling errors and things like that. So this is talking about how long should shaving not be done. And then, there's also operation ke baad pain ho raha hai. So a lot of code mixing here. So these are real questions that real users were asking. Yes. Of course, we had all the approvals and all in place in terms of privacy and all to do this. And with these real questions, with ground truth available, which doctors had verified, we were able to then see for different models in the same setting, what those models were telling, what those models were answering, and then do an eval. So there is a paper on this as well, if you're interested in the details of this. So here the real sort of USP of this is, of course, the data comes from real users, but because we do the evaluation process very carefully, the setup is the same across the 24 models as well, right? And so because of this, we are able to do a fair evaluation across these different models. And we also used specialized metrics, again, in consultation with the doctors over there about what constitutes a good answer, like what are the different dimensions that we should check for when we are evaluating a particular answer. Yeah, and unfortunately in this study, it is shown that lots of Indian LLMs, right? LLMs that have been trained specifically for India, they don't do that well compared to the global LLM. So in fact, in this particular study, the Qwen model, the Chinese one, was the best at doing this particular task. So to end here, I'll just spend a couple of minutes on our latest work, which is called Samiksha. So this is really the work that we are doing this year. It is still in progress. And here we're trying to, again, look at how we can create very, very realistic benchmarks for how these models will actually be used in India, right? And or more broadly in like global South kind of context. So we basically took a few domains that we thought were going to be very critical. So healthcare, which includes mental health, agriculture, education, finance, legal, and so on. These are the ones that people keep talking about. These are the ones that are going to be really important for use cases for us. And we try to involve the community, and I'll talk more about that in the next slide, in as many places as possible in this whole benchmark creation process. And so this, we believe, is the first benchmark that is really designed ground up for India in this way, where we are really trying to involve as many people as possible in this benchmark creation and curation process. This is again in collaboration with CARIA and also another organization called Collective Intelligence Project, which works a lot with communities. So the way it works is as follows. So there are three phases in this. So the first phase is essentially trying to see what should the benchmark contain, right? So what should we even be evaluating if we are creating a new benchmark? And here we work with lots of civil society organizations and experts in specific domains. So for example, in health, we work with a bunch of NGOs that have healthcare sort of bots or have worked in the ecosystem for a long time and have their own communities of users. And by doing interviews with these CSOs, we basically come up with what these benchmarks should contain based on their own experience and so on. We distill those down into specific themes and categories of questions and so on. Once we have this, and this is typically, CSOs are really busy, so we just get some time with them and we do an interview and we try to distill. So this is typically done just for the Indian context generally. And we also ask them if there's any cultural nuances, like is it different in, say, North India or a particular state that they work in? Are there some topics that get asked, or are their communities more interested in certain topics? So this is more relevant for fields like agriculture and so on, where there may be specific things in specific regions, also potentially for healthcare and education and so on, right? After we get these general guidelines of what the benchmark should comprise of, we then ask these Karya workers again from the specific language and culture that we are targeting to expand on these to create these questions for these. So I'll show you some examples of these questions, but essentially the Karya workers do an expansion and query generation of whatever guidelines we get from the civil society experts, right? And these Karya workers are of course non-experts in the domains, but they are still part of the community. And so we really want the kind of questions that they would ask about a particular topic to be in the benchmark. After that is done, we then do the response generation and evaluation. So then we ask all of these questions to all the LLMs that we are evaluating, and then we do multiple types of evaluation. So for the evaluation, we do human evaluation as we had done in a Pariksha kind of setup, but we also do an LLM judge evaluation as well. Right? So the point here is really to involve civil society organizations in figuring out what the benchmark should look like, to involve people who are at the sort of in those communities, to expand those into real questions that people would ask. And then once the responses are generated, to also involve the community in evaluation. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that there are rubrics that we also need to come up with, right? Like again, what constitutes a good answer and all. All of that is also provided by the civil society organizations and expanded upon by us. So this, as I said, is a sort of collaboration. So CIP is really taking the lead on sort of working with the civil society organizations, doing these interviews and so on. Karya, of course, does the data collection from the Karya workers, and we are involved in the evaluation phase. So I won't go into too much of detail into what this is, but I'll just I'll show you some of the examples of the kind of questions that we've got in the health domain, right? So we have questions like, elderly women say that babies should be breastfed, but doctors stop us. What should we do? There was a movie, there's a particular Kannada movie in which something happened. Is this really possible or not? I can't speak freely with my gynec, something about Shivratri, etc. So all of these we did, across 3 languages in our pilot, and we've collected 800 questions like this, along with the rubrics to evaluate these as well. And we've done the evaluation as well so we basically evaluated 3 different models, one of the Llama models, the Qwen model, and the Sarvam multilingual model as well. And we find that essentially all of them do similarly, but the Qwen model typically wins in all cases. We also do an LLM judge versus human evaluation and so on. It's very clear that the LLM judges just used in a vanilla sort of fashion are not going to do the job. So we are working on a better LLM judge system, trying to have more nuts and bolts and more control, etc. We call that like an agentic evaluation framework. So we have that. But the point that I want to make over here is basically that at the end of this year, or probably in January, we are going to have around 3,000 data points per language, and we are doing this across 11 languages in different domains. So health is one, but we are also doing agriculture and education and so on. So this is going to be a big benchmark, like, it's going to have around 30K data points across 11 languages, and we are going to do this extensive evaluation across around 30 models. So you'll see a similar leaderboard as I showed for the Pariksha evals from this Samiksha benchmark as well. This also we are keeping private, so we are not going to release this benchmark so that nobody trains. And again, this is all data created from the ground up, like it is not derived from any web data or anything like that. So there is no danger of contamination. So the evaluation on this will be like a fair evaluation, that is that. So I will end here and talk about, just leave you with this, right? I talked a lot about evaluation today, only about evaluation actually, but evaluation really feeds into understanding these models, right? Understanding what their capabilities are, what their limitations are, where they should be used, where they shouldn't be used, etc. And of course, with this understanding, we have the chance to improve these models as well. So we've actually done some work concretely in this direction, where we've used the insights that we got from the evaluation process and used those to actually make improvements in these models by doing better fine tuning or by improving the pre-training process itself, etc. Right. So I see this as like a cyclic thing where what we're doing in evaluation really feeds into understanding and improvement, and then that again, as the models improve, the evaluation techniques also need to become more and more sophisticated in order to really make sure that they work in the real world, which is the real goal. So yeah, I'll end here. I don't know if we have time for too many questions or not.
We do, ma'am. We do. We'll hand it over to the chairperson, Professor Prabha.
Oh, thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating, Dr. Sunaina, and I'm sort of keeping notes and trying to, just understand this whole field, which seems so interesting. I think what you have, initially, of course, to all us novices, you kind of talked a little bit about what generative AI is and LLMs and how, how it is viewed globally. And then you took us through, I think, very important areas, which were basically how do you understand benchmarks, how do you understand judges, the importance of techniques, data sets, interpretation. I think that's very important. The role of errors, and the very important human role, which is, which seems to be clearly coming out, that unless humans are involved in this whole exercise, and the absolutely amazing work you're doing with Karya and the Pariksha, I think it's something that we need to learn from. So thank you so much for that. We'll keep listening to you again from the recorded version, I'm sure, to derive things. I'll start off. I'm sure there are a few questions, but I'll start off. Now, if you look at the world, 1 in 7 human beings in the world is an Indian, and the other 1 in 7 is Chinese. I'm aware of the fact that even though 1 in 7 people in the world are Indians, we obviously don't speak the same language, and most of us are not using ChatGPT, so or any of the AI, or not using the internet very much. So maybe we are not able to feed in as much as we should, given the numbers that we are, in our country. Ideally, it should actually be having much more output. That's number one. So how does that, how do we make sense of that? Is it just internet use, or is it like, how do we enhance that data input, even though we are the largest population in this whole world, percentage of population? With Mandarin Chinese, are things better? Because we are 17.8%, they are 17.2%. They all speak the same language. They seem to be quite savvy in terms of internet. So I'm just trying to think whether the more we use, does it perform better? So that's one question which I have. The second question is, there's a lot of sort of, like you mentioned, people are bringing out the Indic language version. OpenHathi, for example, I think is the sort of latest. How does it, what is your opinion about its performance in, is it only the sort of big languages where right now it can perform best? And even in Hindi, is it able to look at the nuance? That's the second question. I mean, to me, even calling something Indian Hathi, when Hathi is the Indic language only in Hindi and not across other, I know it's in Marathi, it's called Hatti, that those are the only 2 languages where Hathi is a thing, So trying to, even to name things, to do it in a way which is slightly more generic, which everybody understands. Or like, I have a contention with Arate also, because again, it's a very Tamil, like nobody else understands Arate other than people in Tamil Nadu. So, can we do things which are slightly more generic so that more and more people will use, we have more and more data? So I'm trying to figure out a way in which we can get our Indian people to generate more and more data. And the final question is related to the absolutely amazing questions which you got in your chatbot about fasting in Shivratri and, those kind of things which are like, to me, who was interested in women's mental health, I saw all those questions about gynecological issues, pregnancy. Again, what we feed is what we'll get. If today I put ChatGPT, can I fast in Shivratri? I don't know what I'll get, whether ChatGPT will understand Shivratri. So I think just these few questions about how do we enhance the use, and is Mandarin Chinese therefore any better than English or other languages? Yeah.
Yeah, very great questions actually. And let me start with the Chinese one. So there are different kinds of data sets that go into the training process of these large language models, right? So in the initial phase of training, usually the kind of data that goes into these models is what is found on the web, right? So think of it this way, like the entire internet, right, which is available for public consumption, is scraped by some system and then created into a data set, and that dump is available somewhere, and then you can train your model on that, right? So when you look at this web data, you find that it is predominantly English, as I said, but there is quite a lot of Chinese also, quite a lot of, in the sense that, I mean, it is still very small compared to English, but there is a substantial chunk of Chinese data also on that, right? Now, where could that come from? That could come from articles, that could come from Wikipedia, that could come from forums, that could come from, you know, anything that is available for scraping on, which is available as public data, right? That is where I think the Indian language data is very little, right? And even the data that exists may not be in a form that is very easily consumable by these models. For example, how many of us actually type in our native languages on the web, right? Even if we are typing on Facebook and so on, right? Even on public facing posts, we may not actually type in our own languages, right? So how much Indian language data are we creating on the web that is available for public consumption? I don't think that's a lot, right? And who is actually capable of creating articles and websites and things like that? That is also very small fraction of probably people who are very motivated to keep their own languages, alive, and, to create data in their own language. So that becomes and of course, given the linguistic complexity, right? We have these, we have the scheduled languages, we have so many dialects, we have these smaller languages and so on, right? So that becomes a very small proportion of data for each of the Indian languages, and the tail is very, very long here, right? That is the data that is available for this initial training phase, which is available as these standard sort of web dumps. And pretty much all models use the same set of data for their initial training. Now, the thing that really happens is that in the second or the third phase of training, the models actually use different sets of data for their training, right? And that depends on what data they have access to, right? And so, for example, of course, this is all speculative, like I don't know how they actually train the models, but for example, you could imagine a Meta, right, which has access to WhatsApp chats, can use lots and lots of data that is created, even if not in Indian script, right, at least in like the transliterated versions and so on, right? We do send a lot of WhatsApp messages to each other, right? So you can imagine that if Meta has to create a language model, right, they can use the data that they have access to. Of course, given all the privacy and all of those other considerations in place, right? Similarly, for a Google, right?
They follow the rules.
Right. Similarly, for a Google, right, like they have access to a lot of data about us, right? And so they could potentially use that data in that second phase of training, right, which is only available to that organization, right? It's not available as public data. Same thing with, in fact, OpenAI says that India is the second largest user base for them, right? So it's clear that Indians are actually chatting. Of course, like whether that reach is there in the rural India and all, that is a different matter. But the volume that we are producing is huge for OpenAI, but that's not available as public data, right? That is only available to OpenAI to train their own models with, right? And so there is a very big skew between the data that is on the web and potentially the data that people have access, like companies have access to, because of usage in India, because of all this social media and even model usage. So that is a way that potentially we could improve these models, and I'm sure that is the way that they will be using this data, because they have all of these companies have said that they want to do better on Indian languages and Indian contexts and so on, because there are so many users here, right? And so but the thing is that that is not available to everyone to use, right? So if an organization now wants to build a language model and they want to build it for Indian languages, or they want to improve it for Indian languages, they don't have access to this data that Meta has access to or OpenAI has access to, right? So that is where it's a little bit of a, like, we are producing all this data. We can incentivize people to produce a lot of, like, chat a lot with ChatGPT, but that data is really going to go to one organization, right? And so that becomes a little bit of a thing. And then so in that sense, I think Mandarin, because they have much more presence on the web, they also have, of course, the internal data sets for different companies and all that is there, but they do have a lot more web presence, because of which the starting point itself for those languages is much better than for Indian languages, right? And your second question was on, let me recollect what yours.
Yeah, I think you answered some of the other one also. But, how can you ensure more and more
that people, right?
you?
And I think you asked about the languages also, right? Like, or
If similar questions were asked, yeah.
oh yeah, about the data, the data that we collected, right? So the data that we collected, we don't have a bot yet. So we just collected from, people, giving them guidelines on what kinds of questions they can ask and ask them to ask in their own cultures and contexts. But yes, that is the kind of data that we are targeting, like, very culturally nuanced, specific to certain languages or regions if possible, etc. And, that's what makes the sort of data collection unique for us. Like, we are really trying to go down to the grassroots when it comes to that data collection.
Thank you. I think, Lekhansh, do we have time for a couple of other questions, or we need to move on to the next session?
We can take one more question, ma'am.
Is there anybody else who would like to ask anything? I mean, I'm bubbling with questions, but I'm going to keep.
I have one question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Thank
Sachin.
you, Dr. Sunaina. It was wonderful presentations. And I just asking you about the safety of these AI models.
Yeah.
Because what we learned that many people are asking the health advices through this.
Yeah.
And like we say ki, right now our most youngsters are reading the history through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So same thing is happening. So people are believing ChatGPT more than Google.
Absolutely.
So but junk in, junk out. Type is happening. So what ChatGPT and AI are also using are mostly the data available on the web. That is also absolutely rubbish kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how to ensure that things in coming models?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so it is true that, I mean, at least from our, whatever we have seen, people are asking a lot of questions to these, models. And earlier it used to be said, right, like your Google search history really reveals a lot about, you. But now I think it's going to be like your chat history with ChatGPT that is going to do that, right? And so people seem to be asking a lot of questions. The thing is that there are a lot of efforts being made by all these larger model builders to ensure that the models don't go astray, right? So, for example, one of the things that we've seen in a lot of models is they don't want to give any diagnosis when they're asked a health question, right? Or even in a mental health question, they don't want to give a diagnosis. They want to redirect to a care provider, right? That's the ideal outcome for them. Like, that's the policy that they want to follow, that they don't want to do diagnosis. They want to maybe reassure the user a little bit or something, and then say that, why don't you go talk to a mental health professional? In fact, some of them even go and say, let me pull up information about the nearest mental health professional for you, and then you can tell them the steps that they can take, etc. Right? That's the ideal outcome. The problem is, because these models are very brittle, the outcome can be sort of like, you can just change the way you ask the question to get very bad outcomes, right? And we've seen, in fact, models even suggesting, like, how to take your own life and things like that, which is totally against the policy. Like, the policy states that if there is any kind of suicidality intent detected, then immediately it has to redirect to like a helpline and things like that. But if you just ask the question in a different way, and there are so many ways of asking those questions, especially when you come to these other cultures and contexts, right? You may not use the words exactly, but you may allude to, the fact that you want to do that or something like that. And those, the models are not able to detect, right? So the guardrails need to be really multidimensional, multicultural for them to be effective. And then once the guardrail is applied, we need to do very extensive evaluation to ensure that the guardrail is actually working as intended, and we are not able to sort of bypass the guardrail very easily. Right. But I think this is a very big concern for everyone right now.
Thank you. In fact, I asked ChatGPT, I want to end my life. What can I do? And it, of course, said, and this was for a talk that I was doing, just to reassure everyone. And it strangely, it didn't point me towards any Indian resources. And I was like, we have Telemanas, we have all of this stuff, and that doesn't seem to come up. It goes send me to the Samsa website and, all kinds of things, but it didn't send me to which basically means that we haven't fed enough data about our services for ChatGPT to pull it up actually. So I think sometimes those safety issues are also very important.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can just imagine, right, in some other language, the way that they would refer to this, right, ending life and all, maybe completely, or you may allude to it, you may have a metaphor for it and all that. LLMs are not going to be able to understand those things, especially in other languages, right? And so the guardrail just fails. And so it may actually suggest, and it has actually happened, right? We've seen cases where things like this have happened. So that is very worrying, I think. And that's why we really want to do a larger movement around multilingual safety, just to ensure that before these things they're already out there, but before they are adopted at scale, that we have some control over this.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sunaina. And I think you can move on to the next session, Lekhansh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sitaram. Thank you, Dr. Prabha, for this session. I think it was an insightful discussion. We got to know a lot about safety and also just about evaluation and benchmarking was amazing.